मानवक गाथा यो वाद संसार रो मानो जेसु संख्य मुनि भागवा हाथ किसु पार सतो बाल विरिय सामंगी संसुग संसार नंद मोती राग विराग मा निज मा सोसं धम्म मा संसार मा पासी फूलं मधुर
When we speak about the teaching of the Buddha, we must remember that there are different levels of teaching and there are different levels of practice. So this doesn't mean that everyone should be practicing at the same level. So in our series of talks, first we spoke about devotion. That is the basic level of practice, devotion. And devotion really is the devotion to the ideal of perfection. So at that level you are not perfect. You have not become perfect, but you are thinking of this ideal of perfection and desiring to become perfect. So there we pay respects to the ideal, and the ideal is seen as the Buddha. So the Buddha becomes this ideal and goal in life. But we have not reached that goal. So this is aspiring to that goal. So at the second level, we have the practice of good conduct, which is the first step in becoming good, is to practice good behavior. So we are trying to correct the behavioral part, where we don't come in conflict with other people and we do things which are considered to be good, just and fair and that sort of thing. Good relationships. And then we go to the next step, which is the purification of the mind. So purifying the mind, which leads to the true happiness. So this is a higher level, that is the third stage. So everyone is not able to practice at that level. So it is mainly those who renounce the world, the worldly life, the material naturalistic life, and those who become monks or nuns, these are the people who will be able to practice that in full. The ordinary householder or layman is not able to attain those 4 jhanas. To attain the 4 jhanas is a very high level of practice. So today, those who practice at that level are called mystics. So the mystics are at a higher level of practice. And even higher level than that is the level of the enlightened or awakened people, awakening to the realities of life. Now, that is the level that I am going to speak about today, or this talk. Now, although we may be happy by purifying and calming the mind, our mind may be tranquil and happy, but we still have a problem. And that problem is we begin to grow old, we begin to fall sick and die. All religions begin to talk about eternal happiness and eternal life. Why are they talking about eternal happiness and eternal life? Because our happiness is impermanent and life is impermanent. So this is a problem that people try to solve through the practice of religion. And most religions, the solution is in the next life, after death. They believe that they can go to heaven where they'll have eternal happiness and eternal life. That is just a belief and a hope. It's based on hope and belief. But here the Buddha speaks about this same problem, but the solution is not in the next life. It's here and now. It can be solved in the present. And the way to solve this is not to take refuge in some external supernatural power, but to take refuge in yourself. This is the mature way of doing it. It is the child that goes out to seek help in others. But the mature person is a person who begins to help himself or herself. So that self-reliance is the main thing in maturity. So this is a way of practicing religion in this self-reliant way, which is the humanistic way. The humanistic way of practicing religion, instead of the theistic way where we begin to depend on an external God or the creator of the world or some supernatural being. Humanistic way is to make use of the human intelligence and the human efforts, human energy to solve the problems. Today the world is gradually moving towards the humanistic way. This is why people tend to give up their religious dogmas and begin to think on their own and also depend on modern science and technology to solve their problems. That's the humanistic way. So as the human beings advance and evolve, religion will automatically become humanistic. So today, Buddhism is that religion that it's not, Buddhism is really not another religion among other religions. It is a critique of religion, where religion is examined and understood. And this way, the religious problem, which is the problem of existence, it is because we exist that we have this problem. So it is the problem of existence that religion is trying to solve. Now the problem of existence is what the Buddha called dukkha, or suffering. And that is that we are all born, and from the time we are born, we begin to grow old. The aging process. At first, the young child begins to become an adult, but it doesn't end there. We go beyond that, and we begin to grow old, and then ultimately fall sick and die. This is the problem. We don't like that. People celebrate their birthdays, but they don't celebrate the death day. But the problem is, if we are born, we always have to die also. We don't realize that. When we celebrate the birthday, we don't realize that we have started approaching death. The only reason that we could celebrate a birthday is to celebrate the fact that we have not died yet. We have been able to survive so many years. But still, that itself becomes the cause of our unhappiness. So all this means that our life is impermanent. Not only life, everything in the world is impermanent. So the Buddha pointed out that the way to solve this problem is to understand existence. It is because we don't understand what we call existence that this has become a problem. We all believe that we are existing. But is it a fact? No one questioned that. If a thing is continually changing, say like the wave in the ocean, a wave is all the time changing. It's a change. So if things are changing all the time, do they really exist? That's the problem. In ancient times, the philosophers were talking about this change. What they saw was, they thought there was some permanence in the change. They used two words to talk about this. One was being and the other was becoming. The change was called becoming. And the permanence was called being. Now what this means is, if you have a golden ring or something like that, you can melt that gold and convert it into something else. So that means the ring has disappeared and something else has taken the place. It has changed. But there is something that has not changed, which is gold. Gold has not changed. So that change was called becoming. That means the ring became something else. So the change was a becoming. But the gold was still being there in the same way as gold. So that the permanent aspect was seen as being. Now when these Western scholars, they came to study Buddhism, he saw the Buddha speaking about impermanence. So when they saw the Buddha speaking about impermanence, they thought he is talking about becoming. So there is a word that the Buddha used, bhava. The word bhava is being, not becoming. But these translators thought, because the Buddha is speaking about impermanence, he cannot be talking about being, he must be talking about becoming. Bhava as becoming. But that was a mistake. The Buddha was talking about being here. It is because we are thinking that being for the Buddha was not a reality. Being was a concept. The Buddha saw this as a concept, that we form the concept of being. We are changing from the time we are born. We are in a process of change. We keep on changing. The person who is born is not the same person who dies in old age. The body has changed. The mind has changed. Everything has changed. It's something else. But we don't think like that. We think it is the same person who died. So that concept of being, which is a continuity of existence, that is what is creating the problem. Because I am being, I am born, then I grow old, and then I die. So the I is always there, the being. So as long as we think like that, then we are thinking about the change and the impermanence of our being. And that is how we become unhappy about it, because we don't want that. Because we are being, we want to continue to be. And we want to continue to be young. No, we don't want to continue as old people. That's a problem. So being is a static concept. A static concept in a dynamic reality. A dynamic reality. We are trying to cling on to a static concept, which is an illusion. So, the static concept is really emotional. It is an emotion that wants us to believe in the existence or being. Whereas when we think and reason out, we see the impermanence of these things. There is no real being. But our emotions tell us, no, there is a being. I want to be. So we cannot face death. So when we cannot face death, we have to somehow believe that even when the body dies, I will still remain. Maybe go to heaven or go to hell and remain somehow. So we want that permanence, which is all emotion. So actually what is happening is the emotion is coming in conflict with our reason. The emotion and reason are in conflict. And when emotion and reason are in conflict, what happens? Emotion always wins. That's what is happening. That's the point. So therefore we become unhappy as a result. Because the emotion is being frustrated, disappointed. So we become unhappy. So what this emotion is doing is, what the Buddha pointed out was that this emotion is saying, this is mine. It is the attachment to this body. The emotion becomes attached to the body and say, this body is mine. This body is mine, this mind is mine, these feelings are mine, this consciousness is mine, these thoughts are mine. We begin to personalize. And what we call the self is the sum total of all that we call mind. All that is mind has been personalized. And through the process of personalizing, we arrive at a personality. That personality is the myself. Because I have personalized it. If I didn't personalize the body, If I didn't personalize the mind, if I didn't personalize my feelings, my thoughts, my consciousness, then there will be no personality. So the personality came into being through personalization. And why do I personalize these things? Because of my emotion. It is the emotion that is doing the personalizing. That emotion is what is called tanha, usually translated as craving. Tanha is the emotion. So it is that emotion that does the personalizing. And the personalizing results in the personality. And once the personality has come into being, I have come into being. So I come into existence, not because of birth. I have come into existence because of personalizing. This is the important thing to understand. Normally we think I came into existence because I was born. I was not born. The body was born. The birth of the body is simply the birth of the body. But the birth of the body became my birth because I personalized the body. If I didn't personalize the birth of the body cannot be my birth. And if I didn't personalize the body growing old is not my growing old. And if I didn't personalize the body, the death of the body is not my death. You see, whatever is happening to the body, I say this is happening to me. Why? Because I have personalized it. So it is this personalizing process which is called upadana, usually translated as clinging or grasping. This is not just ordinary clinging or grasping, this is personalizing. And through this process of personalizing, the personality comes into being, or I come into being. This is why Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Naturally, when you think, I think, if you say, I think, then, of course, the next is I am. So, I think is the personalizing of the thinking process. When you say, I think, and therefore I am is the personality coming into being. So the important thing to understand is the only way to get out of this suffering is to learn to depersonalize what has been personalized. But as I said earlier, It cannot be done by simply rational thinking, because the emotion is involved. It is necessary to get rid of the emotion before we can even understand this properly. So the emotion must be understood. What is an emotion? The emotion is not something that is built inside. That this is a mistake that Sigmund Freud made. He thought that emotion is something built inside. You can't do anything about it other than find some kind of expression for this emotion. We have to satisfy the emotion some way or other. So he also realized that we cannot always satisfy these emotions or gratify the emotion. So the only thing that can be done is to sublimate the emotion. That is to convert the emotion to something else which is acceptable. Now, if I am angry, the anger is an emotion, and I want to kill a person because I am angry. So, but then that's not a good thing. So we have to sublimate that, to express that in a good way. That is what is called sublimation. That is the solution that he found. But the problem is, that is not going to solve the problem really, because he wrote a book called Civilization and its Discontents. To be civilized is to sublimate the emotions. That is how we become civilized. But in becoming civilized, we become unhappy people because we are discontented. There is no real contentment. But Buddha solved this problem in a different way. This is important to understand. What the Buddha pointed out was, this emotion is not something built inside, seeking satisfaction or gratification. Emotion comes from outside. That's the important thing. It's not something that comes from inside and goes out, but it is something that starts from outside and comes in. So, when Freud used the word instinct, which means is the emotion built inside, the Buddha used the word asava. Asava is also very badly translated today. Very often you find it translated as canker. What is a canker? It's like a sore or something like that. It's coming from the root through. Through is to flow. It's a flowing. Asava means flowing in. That is why some people translate asava as influx. But I translate asava in a more meaningful way. And that is, influence. Influence. Influence is also flowing in. So asava is really a flowing in. How does it flow in? It is simply starting with the stimulation of the senses. When the senses are stimulated, nerve impulse goes from the sense organ to the brain. That is also flowing in. And then the brain begins to make a decision about what is being seen. At first, there is seeing of something, the process of perception. And then you begin to interpret what you have perceived through the process of conception. And once you have interpreted what you have seen, then according to that interpretation, a message is sent to the glands, and the glands begin to secrete a hormone, and that hormone begins to make certain parts of the body overactive or some parts underactive, and this way a change occurs in the whole body. That is what we call an emotional arousal. If it is anger, adrenaline flows into the blood. If it comes in the form of a sexual desire, a sexual hormone flows into the blood. So this is how it happens. So it all starts from outside, stimulation of the senses. So when the senses are stimulated, this whole reaction occurs. And when the emotion is aroused, tension occurs in the muscles. Muscles become tensed. And this tension is like the bow and the arrow. You pull the string with the arrow, it becomes more and more tense. The more tense it becomes, the more it wants to release the arrow. And then there is the action taking place. So in a similar way, the gun and the trigger is also a similar thing. So in a similar way, this whole reaction of the organism results in action, which is the behavior. So if emotion is something that is coming from outside, it is possible to stop that. It is possible to stop that reaction. You don't have to be trying to satisfy the emotions or gratify the emotions. The important thing is to learn to stop the reaction and calm the mind. So the calmness and tranquility of the mind is the solution to the problem. Now that is what we were talking about earlier also. So this tranquility of mind was the solution of the Buddha, not sublimation. That's the difference. And with the tranquility comes the relaxation of the body muscles also. That's the important thing to understand. So that emotional excitement leads to the personalizing, and the personalizing leads to the personality, and the personality leads to the birth, old age, disease, death. All the suffering comes from there. This is why the Buddha said, tanha is the cause of this suffering, which is the emotion. And the emotion can be brought to an end through the proper technique, which was that supernormal eightfold way. So we have to go beyond the normal to a supernormal state to solve that problem. So this was the ending of the problem of dukkha or suffering. And this can be done only by calming the mind. But the mind cannot be calmed without calming our behavior. So the first step is to calm the behavior. And the behavior cannot be calmed if our goal is not calmness. If our goal is simply seeking sensual pleasure, we cannot calm the mind or the behavior. So this is why this whole problem of existence can be solved only by going gradually. First the devotion, then the control of behavior, the good life, sila, it is called sila. The devotion is called saddha. Saddha, sat means what is good and true. Dha is to uphold. So that is the devotion. And then comes the sila, which is the good behavior. And then comes samadhi, which is the purity and tranquility of mind. And after samadhi comes the understanding of the problem. This understanding of the problem is really the solution of the problem. When we have understood that there is no being, although we think there is being. So this is a paradigm shift. It's a paradigm shift. But in this process of becoming aware of this delusion, it is really a maturity of our consciousness. The consciousness has to evolve. Normally, all animals are just conscious of a world. They see, hear, smell, taste, touch. Through the senses, we become conscious of a world. That is consciousness. But this consciousness is taking place without our knowledge. We are not in control of this. It's just happening. It's happening due to the presence of the necessary conditions. When the necessary conditions are there, it happens. When the necessary conditions are not there, it doesn't happen. We are not doing anything. In other words, it is an unconscious process. It is from a state of unconsciousness that consciousness comes into being. But that consciousness is actually what is called cognition. That is seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking. This is cognition. But this whole process is occurring in an unconscious state. So, if we want to stop this process, we have to become conscious of that. It is only by becoming conscious of that this process can be stopped. So this is the important thing to understand. So this whole process of the practice is an effort to become conscious of the process of consciousness itself. It is not trying to become conscious of something outside. It is trying to become conscious of the process of consciousness. So that is the paradigm shift. So this paradigm shift cannot occur automatically. You have to go through that process. Which has to be done consciously. This is the growth of consciousness. Consciousness grows fully only when consciousness has become conscious of itself. That is the ultimate point in the evolution of consciousness. So when we speak of the Buddha, we are speaking of a person who has evolved to that highest level where a person becomes conscious of consciousness. That is the meaning of nirvana. So nirvana is not simply calming the mind. That simply calming the mind is samadhi. But when we speak of nirvana, we are speaking about the growth and evolution of the consciousness to the point where this consciousness becomes conscious of itself. And when that has happened, that emotional agitation, excitement will never come back. So that is becoming calm while being active. The action is there. It's not inactivity. But in the samadhi state, it is all inactive. The calmness. But you can be active and at the same time be calm inside because the emotional excitement never takes place. This is the important thing to understand. And in this process, the perceptual process is going on. Conceptual process is going on. But the emotional process has stopped. And the conceptual and perceptual process is aware of itself. And because the perceptual process is aware of itself, it sees through the process. And therefore, when you perceive a book, for example, there is a book in front of me, and I perceive the book as normal people do. But at the same time, what you are perceiving is not just the book. What you are perceiving is the perception of the book. So instead of saying there is a book in front of me, you can say there is the seeing of a book. So I think this is a good time to stop. You can stop here and you can ask questions here.
Story of Chula Pantaka, how a Dalit became a saint. In the city of Rajagaha, there were two brothers, Chula Pantaka and Maha Pantaka. Now Maha Pantaka was the elder brother. He was very bright and became an outstanding monk at the monastery. Chula Pantaka followed his elder brother to become a monk. But he had a problem. He was a Dalit and wasn't able to remember any of the Buddha's teachings, even the short verses. Now during the Buddha's time, teachings were passed from teacher to pupil orally, so the teachings were not written down and had to be memorized. His brother tried teaching Chula Pantaka, but gave up after some time. The harder he tried to teach his younger brother, the less successful he became. Chula Pantaka could not remember anything. Maha Pantaka thought that it would be a waste of time for his brother to remain as a monk at the monastery. The problem came to a head over a lunch invitation. Jivaka, the Buddhist doctor, invited the Buddha and the monks for lunch. Mahapantaka was in charge of selecting the monks for lunch, but he only wanted monks with wisdom and spiritual attainment to attend. Chulapantaka's name was left out of the invitation list. When Chulapantaka found out that his name was not on the list, he was dismayed. He took that to be a signal for him to disrobe and to return to lay life. Tears were streaming down his face because he didn't really want to disrobe. The next morning, when Chulapantaka was leaving the monastery to disrobe, he met the Buddha at the door of the monastery. The Buddha asked him, "Chulapantaka, where are you going at this time?" Chulapantaka replied, "Master, my brother drives me away, so I'm going to disrobe." And the Buddha asked, "Chulapantaka, you did not ordain as a monk for your brother. You ordained for yourself. When your brother told you to leave, why didn't you come to me? Come, stay with me." The Buddha stroked young Chulapantaka on his head and led him to sit in front of the Buddha's hut. He then gave Chulapantaka a clean white cloth and told him to rub it while repeating Rajo Haranam, meaning removing dust. So Chulapantaka was rubbing the cloth and repeating Rajo Haranam, Rajo Haranam, removing dust, removing dust. He was feeling hopeless and frustrated. But after his frustration subsided, he suddenly realized that the pure white cloth in his hand had become dirty. He reflected, before, this cloth was pure and white. Now it has become dirty. His good karma has ripened, and he thought, this body of mine isn't lasting or permanent. Then he realized that all conditioned things are impermanent. At that time, the Buddha was at Jivaka's house. Through his super-normal power, he knew about the progress of this young monk. He projected a vision of himself in front of Chulapantaka, saying, "Chulapantaka, the piece of cloth is not the only thing made dirty by the dust. Within oneself are the dust of passion, the dust of ill will, and the dust of ignorance. Only when you remove this dust can you achieve your goal and attain sainthood." Chulapantaka understood the message and continued meditating. In a short while, he attained sainthood together with extraordinary knowledge and mental powers. He was no longer a Dalit. At Jivaka's house, the moment came for water to be poured into a bowl before food was served. The Buddha covered the bowl with his hand and asked, "Are there any monks left at the monastery?" The answer was, there was none. The Buddha said that there was still one monk at the monastery and he had to be invited. When the messenger arrived at the monastery to fetch Chulapantaka, he saw that there were many monks, all looking like him. Now, one of the psychic abilities of Chulapantaka was that he was able to turn himself into many images of himself. So the messenger was confused, and he didn't know whom to invite for lunch. He returned to Jivaka's house to report this matter. The Buddha instructed him to return to the monastery and call the name of Chulapantaka. When the messenger did that, many voices responded, "I am Chulapantaka." Again, he didn't know who was the right Chulapantaka. He returned to Jivaka's house and asked what to do. He was sent to the monastery for the third time and was instructed to hold on to the first monk who said that he was Chulapantaka. As soon as he caught hold of that monk, all the other images of Chulapantaka disappeared. Chulapandaka accompanied the messenger to Jivaka's house for lunch. After lunch was over, the Buddha directed Chulapandaka to give a sermon. And you could imagine the jaws of the other monks dropped when they heard a brilliant talk coming from someone regarded as the monk with dull wisdom. From this we could see that the Buddha was not a distant figure teaching the Dharma from high above. He was a teacher with great compassion for his disciples. He used a personal touch to inspire Chulapandaka and gave him a physical activity to achieve spiritual breakthrough. He turned Chulapandaka's frustration into a tool for awakening.
They say that one who sees with eyes like blazing wisdom suns the sufferings of all beings who reap for evil they have done, would have guessed the Buddha's light illumines the place beyond space and time, could have guessed that all along the treasure of his wisdom lies within your own mind. Great is the joy, great is the joy, great is the joy within my heart. What you are is what you have done. What you do, you will become. Don't keep looking for what you've never lost. Turn the light around. Take yourself across. The sea of suffering is deep and wide. A turn of the head is the other side. Great is the joy, great is the joy, great is the joy within my heart. What you are is what you have done. What you do, you will become. Don't keep looking for what you've never lost. Turn the light around. Take yourself across. Great is the joy, great is the joy, great is the joy within my heart. Great is
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Welcome to the Bodhidharma sermons. This is the first sermon of the series of Dhamma talks. Our topic is Avijja in Buddhism. Prince Siddhartha, later known as the Gautama Buddha, during his quest to understand what suffering is, learned that in an untrained mind there lives a particular thing called ignorance, or avijja in Pali language. In Buddhism, the word avijja or ignorance does not mean that you are out of your mind. The word is to ignore. It immediately makes you ask what you are ignoring. We are unconsciously ignoring how everything actually works in life, how human cognition works. Without understanding how human cognition operates, we get caught reacting to life rather than experiencing our internal likeness of being. We forget our gentler nature. Of course, we never knew that this process of human cognition existed before. We can't be blamed for the fact that it is being ignored. Our likeness of being is hidden underneath the tension and likeness we personally carry with us during daily life. The Buddha taught us that ignorance supports craving to happen. Along with ignorance, delusion feeds the suffering. Delusion is the spark that ignites the craving, which the Buddha said is the complete cause of suffering. In Buddhism, this word delusion means that we have established a false idea, a false concept of an independent self. We have embraced the idea that each of us is independent of all others, and thus we have missed our connection to our own species. The consequence of this leads us to believe that everything we experience is very personal. We begin to believe that everything is happening to us. We believe our experience is part of us, and that somehow we need to take total control of everything or suffer heavier consequences. But is this true? Is this very idea that causes us to suffer from an imbalanced personal perspective? The Buddha explained that we all have 6 sense doors through which we experience the external world. To name them, they are the external eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and the internal sense door of mind. All of these operate in a very impersonal way. But when we begin our investigation, we don't believe this is possible. Our psychophysical body sees, hears, smells, tastes, touches, or thinks about our world because we cognize all experience through a series of connected links operating an impersonal process that the Buddha called dependent origination. In Pali language, this process is called paticca samuppada. Now, today in the medical community, it is recognized that this process is in line with the scientific research of human cognition. We could say that the Buddha was actually the father of the study of cognitive psychology and modern human cognition because he seems to be the earliest on record. Within this cycle of existence, to talk about this subject in depth. Human cognition is a process that happens extremely fast by initial contact occurring. An arising feeling happens through any one of the 6 sense doors. Usually, an uninformed, untrained mind takes this very personally. But if these sense doors truly work impersonally, as systems within an impersonal body, then it must be true that they are not mine, they are not me, they are not myself, and they are not I either. Through a persistent investigation, the Buddha uncovered the truth of this. Upon his close investigation, he essentially found that our experience in this life happens through the actual sights, sounds, odors, tastes, tangibles, and thoughts that arise through these impersonal working sense doors in body and mind. When you look closely at how they operate, how this happens, an impersonal process is revealed. When we discover this truth, we see that it follows that these experiences must not take personally. Realizing of this fact can change our perspective. This is a shift moving towards an impersonal perspective where we should be able to let go of any arising obstacles in life. If we do this, then life becomes lighter. Buddhist delusion, therefore, clearly means that up until now, we have likely been deluded, confused into believing that everything this is happening should be taken personally, when actually this isn't true at all. The message here is, things don't have to be so heavy. When suffering is the consequence of the way we take up things, the degree of tension in our body increases in the way we take up things. Maybe we become dissatisfied because when we take things personally, it feels like it is our fault and we are no longer in tight control of what is going on. But actually, the question here is, did we ever really control it before? The Buddha called the view where you think everything is me, atta, view or perspective. This is an unharmonious perspective where you believe everything happening is personally me. It is part of me. He called this new impersonal view anatta perspective. This is a more harmonious perspective where we can begin to see things more clearly in a less personal way. The Buddha realized that the root of suffering lies within this process of cognition, where tension and tightness first arise. We first experience suffering at the link we call craving, tanha in Pali. Although it is true that there is a hairline of craving, attention in the previous links which arise in the line of human cognition, it is not until I personally step into the play at the craving link where my first opinion enters in that it becomes obvious that suffering begins. Thus, arising of tension and tightness in mind and in body are triggered by the first personal opinion, the original Buddhist view, a personal view of how I like or I dislike something. And this first obviously happens in the craving link. Our personal dissatisfaction with the way things are at any present time is suffering. The rise in tension in this craving link is a symptom that you and I can learn to identify before suffering gets stronger and expands through mental proliferation, or in Pali, upadana, and turns into reactions. If we can learn to notice this system as it is arising, then we have a chance of letting it go before more damage happens. Therefore, we should memorize that. Craving always manifests as tension and tightness in mind and in body. It is the I like it or the I don't like it. We ourselves give birth to that I like it or the I don't like it. Through our ignorance, and we make a quick unconscious choice out of habit. Without me taking things personally, craving will not arise. Keep in mind, without me taking things personally, craving will not arise. The best part is that by practicing a more impersonal perspective, day to day, in everything we are doing, we can attempt to change this natural pathway, to let go of this personal opinion each time we feel the sensation of tension arising. Then things change. That is why meditation practice is so important to carry with us all the time. It is our repetition of retraining the brain that builds new natural pathways, and then we learn to respond instead of reacting under any circumstances. During his personal investigation, the Buddha found out how mind really works, achieving a higher knowledge of how things work, and practicing this kind of impersonal perspective is progressive. Changing to a more impersonal perspective leads to reducing suffering immediately in life. It turns out that we can retrain our mind to respond to life in a very different way if we are persistent in our effort to purify and train or retrain it. This is why we carry our practice with us into life and try to use it in all situations all the time. The Buddha studied precisely what the suffering actually is and how it happens. Before his enlightenment, when he was still a bodhisattva, he suspected that some kind of process was going on that people did not know about. He found out that this process was very impersonal. In the Samyutta Nikaya of Tripitaka, called the origination, we find that he explained to his monks how he reasoned out the process of dependent origination. This was before he realized he could see it in meditation. Monks, before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened, it occurred to me, alas, this world has fallen into trouble. In that it is born, ages, and dies. It passes away and is reborn. Yet it does not understand an escape from this suffering, headed by aging and death. I investigated this process very carefully. Now, when we read this passage, it could be only about life, death, and another round of life and death. But if you consider for a moment that the Buddha taught what is called the middle way, we might venture to say that it is logical to presume that he investigated this process in more than one way. It is possible to apply to one event in life at a time. This is not that far-fetched when you begin to examine it more closely. the line of dependent origination, can refer even to what is called in Pali Kanika Maran, or the moment-to-moment cycle of this same process. However, the macrocosmic line of lifetime to lifetime, to lifetime, doesn't help you and me here and now anymore. That watching at first, moment to moment, how it works, but examine one event at a time, which takes place, that does make sense. Venturing into an investigation of individual phenomenological events in life, one at a time, can get very interesting and reveal how many mind states happen in this lifetime for each of us. It is good to learn how the process we apply is to one event at a time in life in that very fashion. This means you will be able to watch how arising emotions occur for things like anger, anxiety, depression, grief, hatred. Within one event you see happening at a time. The Buddha continued to work on his investigation and discovered the process consisted of 12 links. Suffering can be felt strongly first at the part he indicated to be the weakest link, called craving, tanha in Pali. During his meditation practice, the Buddha witnessed the rising of suffering many thousands of times. He noticed that suffering always appears following a subtle change in the level of tension in the mind and body as craving first comes up. A pleasant or painful feeling arises just before this craving happens. The Buddha broke this process down and observed very closely how contact, phassa in Pali, feeling, vedana in Pali, and craving, tanha in Pali, always occur in the same systematic way. The Buddha concluded that the real suffering actually is the personal sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair that happens following the point of craving. Craving always manifests as tension and tightness in mind and body involving the I like it or I don't like it, as it consciously pops up immediately following the arising of any pleasant or painful feeling. The craving seems to be habitual. It is our personal habit to try to take control and have an opinion during our experience. In such cases, where personal attachment or aversion occur, an increase of tension happens, which turns out to be the building block or stress. If we do not understand, there is an escape from this situation. Today, we know that stress is the foundation block for many states of disease in mind and body. The Buddha observed that personal view is what sparks craving. And the craving grows stronger and the tension happens more strongly. Tension is the foundation block for stress, and then more severe suffering happens. By believing that this tension is a part of me, is mine, and is myself, this in turn leads to dissatisfaction with the truth of what is happening here and now in the present time. Therefore, taking things personally leads to suffering, many times in the forms of restlessness, guilt, and remorse.